I want my best games on the best platforms covered by the best announcing teams. Period. End of story.
And welcome back, everybody, into another episode of the Announcer Schedules Podcast, episode number 109. I am your host, Mike Gill, along with Phil DeMont-Mollin, who, of course, runs the handle at Announcer Skeds with over 35,000 followers strong. We're getting into the football season. We are live on the X platform, and you can watch us there. Like, rate, review, and subscribe to the Last Word on Sports show. And, of course, you get Last Word on Sports Media and the Announcer Schedules podcast right here. I'm actually working from home today, so a little different backdrop than you're used to seeing for me, Phil. I am heading to Glen Allen, Virginia, which is home to this year's Babe Ruth World Series, the team that I coach in baseball. We've advanced to the World Series, so I'm trying to sneak a show in before I hit the road. A little, hopefully we beat Tropical Storm Debbie to get there, but got a lot going on. And then we see the followers already, watchers out there. If you want to comment, just click on the screen and you can comment on there and send us your comments. We will try to interact with you guys. We'd like to get more interaction from the commenters out there. We got a lot we're going to talk about today, Phil.
Yeah, no doubt. And hey, what's the name of the team? How do we follow along to see how you guys do in the World Series?
So we are Atlantic Shore, New Jersey. You can actually watch the games. I don't know that they do play-by-play. I'm not 100% sure, but there's it's in Glen Allen, Virginia, which is like Henrico County, and they have a streaming service called Highcast. So I think they just do a high camera, and you can see the whole field. I don't know that there's camera movement or shots or play-by-players, but it's a high-cast thing. So you can watch there. It's the Babe Ruth 13U World Series in Glen Allen, Virginia. If you just kind of Google that, you should be able to find us. And we are Atlantic Shore, New Jersey, representing the Middle Atlantic states. So basically, like you're watching on ESPN right now, we can get into the announcers because there was a snafu last night, or two or three of them, because they're broadcasting these Little League regional games from home. The play-by-player was in his house. Eduardo Perez was in his house. And there was, that's tough. It's hard. And I don't know that these Little League facilities, most of them look like they're pretty equipped to handle broadcast. I can't believe some of these Little League facilities. But there was a play in a game. It was a game-winning run, like bottom of the seventh, because it was extra innings. The team scored. I don't know that the play-by-player knew that was the winning run. He didn't really sell it like it was the winning run. So, it's Little League baseball. I get it. These are not even the World Series. These are regional tournaments. But I think not being there is a challenge. Some of the camera stuff, things are happening because the ball's going all over the place in Little League, but the camera's not showing it. So the announcer doesn't really know that it's going on. And then the next thing you know, the camera changes angles and the guy's tagged out and you have no idea how it happened. So it's Little League baseball, though. But, we're the next year up. So the kids on TV now are 12. My team is their first year on the big field, so nobody cares about us.
Very good. Well, best of luck, Mike. And, that's awesome that you've got this endeavor as well, that being on the coaching side of things.
Yeah, so we're leaving today, so we wanted to sneak in episode 109 because the Fox announcer pairings have been released for 2024. They are now official, and Tom Brady is on the list.
Yeah, the announcement came out from Fox. Not really the biggest secret ever that it was going to be Burkhardt and Brady in that number one booth. Aaron Andrews and Tom Rinaldi are back on the sidelines. Their first game, week one, is Dallas at Cleveland. in that 4:25 p.m. Eastern slot. And then that number 2 team, the B team, as expected, Joe Davis, Greg Olson, Pam Oliver, they'll debut with Steelers at Falcons. Now, they announced the other teams as well, and there's quite a bit of movement in terms of the pairings and so forth, Mike. But the one thing to keep in mind here, when we posted these pairings, a lot of people were like, oh, such and such is getting demoted, or this person ranks higher than that one. From my understanding, the way Fox writes their press releases, in this case, the A and B teams are indeed the number 1 and number 2 teams, but everybody beyond that is pretty much interchangeable. In other words, depending on the matchup, depending on the geography, that kind of thing. And they don't necessarily say this is the C, D, E, F team. So just
probably a better way to do it.
Yeah. So just wanted to make that clear as we were announcing the rest of the teams. Now, the one team that didn't change much was Kenny Albert and Jonathan Vilma up in the booth. They'll debut with Minnesota at the New York Giants in week 1. Now, they are without their sideline reporter who they've worked with for the last few seasons, Shannon Spake. She's no longer at Fox, according to reports. Part of that was because they cut back on some of their NASCAR inventory in terms of studio shows and that kind of thing. Megan O'Leary will be the sideline reporter with that team. Adam Amin is now matched up with Mark Sanchez and Christina Pink on the sidelines. Chris Myers will now be working with Mark Schlereth, along with Jen Hale on the sidelines. They debut with Carolina at New Orleans. That'll be a home game for Jen Hale, who's also the Pelicans sideline reporter. By the way, Adam Amin opens at Chicago, a home game for him. He's from the Chicago area, is also the voice of the Chicago Bulls. Kevin Kugler will now be matched up with Daryl Johnston, and they'll debut with the Commanders at the Buccaneers. It's kind of nice to see this on paper and to know what we're dealing with exactly moving forward. But obviously the big news and what everybody's going to be talking about is Brady's debut in the booth, week 1, Dallas and Cleveland, and then also that number 2 team with Greg Olson now working with Joe Davis.
And I noticed on the NFL studio side, no changes really for Fox. Gronkowski kind of added in there, but Terry, Howie, Jimmy, and Michael Strahan with Kurt Menefee, they made no changes to their studio show.
Yeah, big changes over at CBS, of course, with Phil Simms and Boomer Esiason no longer part of that show. But yeah, we're seeing same old with the Fox NFL Sunday studio group. And you kind of wonder, how many more years Terry Bradshaw and Jimmy Johnson in particular are going to be part of that show and what the future plans might be beyond that. But yeah, the usual suspects this time around on Fox.
Yep. So I'm just trying to remember from last year's pairings. Were there a couple changes here? CBS didn't really make any changes. Did they change any of these pairings here? Kevin
they
Kugler,
did,
which is interesting because you associate him with Westwood One so much, and generally the Westwood One guys are with CBS. Tom McCarthy, Kevin Harlan, Ian Eagle, but Kevin Kugler, who does Westwood One, is Fox over here.
Yeah, so pretty much everything except the Kenny Albert, Jonathan Vilma team did change. So they swapped around analysts and play-by-players throughout. So there's going to be, these guys are going to be working with new partners, new teams, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting, just the domino effect, how it all worked out with Tom Brady moving into that number 1 slot. Greg Olson then ends up working with Joe Davis, and then everything shifted from there, with that one exception, Kenny Albert and Jonathan Vilma.
Okay, the Hall of Fame weekend is in the books. Couple observations from you, Phil. Obviously, the game got cut short, so the Hall of Fame game with Buck Aikman, Lisa Salters, Laura Rutledge, that got cut short due to weather, so we didn't get a full game there.
Yeah, just as well. Who watches those fourth quarters of a NFL preseason game anyway? But all kidding aside, yeah, it was kind of cool to see that game over on ESPN and ABC. Also coverage of the induction ceremony all weekend long. And how about this connection, Mike? And this one I've got a personal connection with as well. Mark Vandermeer, who's the voice of the Houston Texans. He's been the voice of the Texans pretty much since they got started as a franchise. Well, Vandermeer was the voice of the University of Miami Hurricanes, 1999, 2000, and 2001, including that incredible 2001 team that won the national championship, winning the Rose Bowl that year. Hall of Famer Andre Johnson played at the University of Miami. And so Vandermeer had the unique opportunity of calling Andre Johnson throughout his college career and also throughout the vast majority of his professional career, which he played with the Texans. And we added it all up. 200 of the 234 games that Andre Johnson played, either as a collegiate or a pro wide receiver, Mark Vandermeer was the play-by-play voice. So really exceptional stuff there. I mean, just like that kind of connection. And Vandermeer's talked about how he remembers Johnson as a freshman, and the depth was so impressive back then for University of Miami football that they redshirted him. You know, usually a guy like Andre Johnson, just one of these, Bruce Feldman does something called the freak list. If they had it back then, Andre Johnson would have been on it. You know, just straight out of high school, just incredible physique and talent and all these things. Well, he ended up being on a redshirt situation because there was guys like Santana Moss and Reggie Wayne and so forth ahead of him. And Vandermeer remembers seeing Johnson practice for the first time. I was there in the sports information office those years. So, really it was cool to kind of put these pieces together. I touched base with Vandy. He was super excited that Andre's going into the Hall of Fame. And I just wanted to mention that because I think it's really rare for a Hall of Fame player to have the same play-by-play announcer throughout his entire career, college and pro. Just kind of a cool connection there that we were able to unearth. So big congrats to Andre Johnson, all the Hall of Famers, and also all the people behind the scenes and the announcers who got to call these guys games. It's really a team moment in a lot of ways for everybody that's part of those Hall of Famers.
Yeah, I'd like to see if any of our viewers or listeners to the podcast can come up with any of those other. You figure, I know, like I went to West Virginia, that Jack Fleming, maybe had some West Virginia Steeler connections in there back in the 70s and 80s. But how often does that happen? I guess how many guys? We had Bob Wischusen. Doesn't do a college team; he does college football. For some reason, I thought Bob was doing Rutgers, but that's Chris Carlin. Chris Carlin does the Rutgers, but he doesn't really do NFL games. Who does both college and pro down there in Atlanta? West Durham.
West Durham. So yeah, it's a rare thing. The timing has to work out just right, where you leave one gig to the other, college to pro, along with the player, which is pretty much Vandermeer and Johnson's, careers mirrored each other there. Then the other part of it is the players got to stay at one place for a long time. And that's what Andre Johnson did from 2003 to 2014. He was with the Texans. Then he played 2 more years, one with the Colts and one with the Titans. So Vandermeer got to call a couple of road games with Johnson in those cases, but just kind of an exceptional deal. If anybody can think of another example like this, it'd be interesting to get it out there. But Vandermeer and Andre Johnson forever linked.
All right, preseason football starts this week. You got games tonight, tomorrow, and this is where you will see some familiar local voices doing NFL games that generally either do national games or don't do a lot of football.
Yeah, really fascinating. A couple of the highlights that I noticed, Carolina Panthers, their crew, Anish Shroff, who's now the radio voice of the Panthers. Well, he gets TV work during the preseason with them. He'll, of course, be on ESPN's coverage of college football. Jason Ross Jr., who we see on the national scene, an up-and-coming announcer. He's back as the Lions play-by-player. Over with the New York Giants, you'll see Phil Simms. If you're wondering what Simms is up to, he'll be one of the analysts alongside Carl Banks, Bob Papa, the play-by-player there. We mentioned Jen Hale earlier. She'll be handling Falcons sidelines. Kevin Kugler, who we also mentioned earlier, he's part of the Texans television coverage. So he'll be, getting some reps on preseason football with the Texans. Your neck of the woods, Mike, Scott Graham and Ross Tucker, part of that Eagles team. Scott Graham, of course, from Westwood One. Ross Tucker now on the national scene as well. Jerry Sandusky is the Ravens radio voice. He'll handle TV alongside Rod Woodson, who we used to see a bunch on network television. Woodson, cool to see his name still in the mix. Evan Washburn, who's a big national sideline reporter. He'll be on the sidelines for Baltimore. Ian Eagle will be working alongside Anthony Beck on the Jets telecast. Adam Amin, we mentioned him as far as the Chicago guy. Well, he'll be handling the Bears. Andrew Catalan, former guest of the podcast, will handle the Bills. And then Kevin Harlan will be back with the Packers. And it's just kind of always cool to kind of reflect that guys like Ian Eagle and Kevin Harlan take these preseason gigs as a chance for them to get reps, for them to get prepared for their network seasons. And then also because they've got some connections to those teams in both of their cases. So always interesting to see these preseason NFL television crews that, give the local fans an opportunity to see. A lot of time on sort of like over the air TV channels is where this stuff ends up airing. But some of the games will be simulcast on NFL Network. So wherever you may be, you may have a chance to see some of these crews.
Yeah, a couple other highlights from my point of view. The McCourty twins, they're doing the Patriot games. I'm wondering, it's interesting why everybody doesn't just take the radio voice and use them for the preseason games. Some do, some don't. Obviously, each market's a little different there. That one stood out. You mentioned Anthony Beck. I just want to give a shout out to my guy Ant. We're buddies. He's going into the West Virginia University Football Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame weekend at WVU, September 21st. I'm going to try to get down there for that game and see him go in the Hall of Fame. We were pretty good friends at West Virginia. We kept in touch. He's now the head coach of the St. Louis Battlehawks. But it's funny because when I was at West Virginia, I did radio, and I used to always gravitate and say, hey, man, we need you on the radio show. And here he is now, the color analyst for the Jets. He does radio in Tampa for the Buccaneers, like pre- and post-game stuff. And, of course, he's now the head coach for the St. Louis Battlehawks and really one of, like, the ambassadors of what was the XFL, now the UFL. He was kind of a big voice of promoting that St. Louis team is pretty big. So I want to give him seeing that he's still doing – I didn't realize he was still doing the analyst. He's the head coach for, a team, but he's still doing the Jets. I think he does some Jets pregame work too. I don't know if he still does the Tampa stuff. He might. He lives in the Tampa area. So I wanted to give him a shout out there. Yeah, you mentioned, Ian Eagle is his partner there. So it's a pretty good crew. Anthony did a lot of college football at ESPN. He was doing
college football for a few years. And, his son now, Mike, his son is a pretty prolific college football quarterback, Rocco Beck.
He's the quarterback for Iowa State.
Correct. Yeah. So, it runs in the family, and that's cool to see. One other note,
I told him how disappointed I was that he let his son go to a Mountaineer rival there.
Right, Big 12, Iowa State, West Virginia. Yep. You mentioned the McCourty twins. They'll be alongside Scott Zolak up in the booth, and from my understanding, the Patriots are doing sort of a non-traditional deal there with those three former players up in the booth calling the Patriots preseason, but no play-by-play announcer. That's my understanding, that they're doing it kind of like an alternate type of approach there. So worth noting there, but good stuff on Becht as well. And great opportunity for him to work along Ian Eagle.
And real quick, another name, Kate Scott is now doing the Seattle games as the preseason voice for the Seahawks. We had her on the podcast. She's also the voice of the Sixers. So Kate Scott now getting an NFL preseason rep. So Joe listened to her conversation with us back on our archives feed. It was a pretty good one. Dave Pasch and Ron Wolfley, Arizona. We had Dave on talking about, of course, Bill Walton. So go back and listen to the archives to that as well. So
Steve Levy too.
Names. Yes.
Steve Levy up in
good
Denver.
Names on the preseason football list.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a who's who of announcers it's a really small package. It's only a handful of games here in August, but like we've heard from some of these announcers, it's a great opportunity for guys to really kick off the season, get familiar with rosters and depth charts and that kind of thing, and obviously make some more money along the way too.
All right, the Olympics are closing ceremonies. They're already here. These things come and go in a flash, man. But we've had this has been a really good Olympics.
Yeah, the number one thing that sticks out for me is, and we talked about these guys before, these swimming announcers, Dan Hicks on the play-by-play, Rowdy Gaines as the analyst, just sensational stuff. I was able to post a behind-the-scenes video inside the booth where it was an ISO on Rowdy Gaines during one of the races, and just to see the amount of focus but also passion that he puts into his call, really something. Gaines did announce that the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics will be his last. So, one last chance to see Rowdy Gaines in action behind the mic in 2028. He does have one more event tomorrow. I don't know if you caught any of this, the open water swim, which is this long distance swimming. He'll be alongside Mary Carrillo for that. Track and field, a lot of discussion about Lee Diffie and how he made that mistake on the men's 100-meter call. I was thankful to see Lee own that, and then also really shine the next couple of days of racing. So he continues, I think, to overall, despite that one mistake, do a great job with the track and field. And plenty of other action going on, including men's basketball with Noah Eagle and Dwayne Wade. We'll see that coming down the stretch here. And like you said, blink of the eye before we know it, closing ceremonies and Olympics will be in the books. But overall, feels like a successful games out there in Paris.
Yep, they've been good, and the basketball, I think, is actually about to tip off France and Germany, and then the United States taking on Serbia 3:30 later today. And the gold medal game is Saturday, I guess, at 3:30, I think, is the gold medal game over there. MLB happenings. We got another call-up.
Yeah, another call-up. Brian Haney, the voice of the Kansas Jayhawks, he filled in for Jake Eisenberg on Royals Radio over the weekend, a MLB debut for Brian, so congratulations to him. Also, we were wondering whether Bob Costas would make it back from the Paris Olympics, where he was doing some spot work for NBC and shaking hands with Snoop Dogg and all that kind of thing. Well, he did make it back from Paris to do the Brewers-Braves game on TBS earlier this week. And then we've got baseball coming up this weekend, a pair of Apple TV Plus games on Friday, as usual. The Cubs White Sox play a Subway series of sorts on Fox on Saturday. That'll be Kevin Kugler and AJ Pierzynski. The White Sox, what a miserable season they are having. It makes you think, Jason Benetti probably happy to be up in Detroit with some of those woes on the field for the White Sox. Also, ESPN Radio this weekend, they'll be in Seattle for Mets and Mariners. Roxy Bernstein and Doug Glanville, both Saturday and Sunday on the national radio call. And then that's also the Sunday night baseball game, Mets and Mariners. One other one worth noting, the Roku package will be back in effect on Sunday. Angels at Nationals. Bob Carpenter, the voice of the Nationals, will handle play-by-play of that one alongside Mark Gubics, the Angels analyst. So all sorts of baseball, and it'll continue to heat up as we head towards the playoffs.
All right, as we get ready to wrap up episode 109, don't forget, if you could do us a nice solid rate, review, subscribe. If you're watching the feed on the X platform, hit the like button, hit the repost button. We've got a whole heck of a lot with the NFL coming up. We're looking forward to the college football season. We'll have that. We might have some fun guests coming up here as football season starts to gear up. So we're working on some things there. But before we get out of here, how about some news and notes?
Yeah, just a couple quick news and notes. You mentioned college football. I'd expect to see a lot of the pairings and the official announcements from the networks there in terms of who we can expect and who to have on what games those opening couple weeks. One transaction that got my attention, Steve Adazio who I really remember most from his time with Boston College as the head coach, but he also was a head coach at Temple for a couple years. Colorado State had a couple tough years after his time at BC with the Rams, and then most recently was an O-line coach with Texas A&M. Well, he's left the coaching ranks now to be an analyst. He'll work with Clay Matvick on the ESPN side of things. So looking forward to how he does on the analyst side. Some sad news: the voice of the Toledo Mud Hens, Jim Weber, passed away. So rest in peace, Jim Weber. Get this, Mike, 49 years as the voice of the Toledo Mud Hens minor league baseball team. That included a run that he had 6,000 consecutive games called for the Mud Hens. We talk about some of these milestones, but absolutely huge one there. I know he was a mentor to a lot of baseball announcers, so we certainly are thinking of his memory. And then finally, Lee Corso celebrated a birthday this week. Happy 89th birthday to Lee Corso, and he'll be back with College Game Day, which will be kicking off soon. I think their debut's in Ireland during that week 0.
All right, there you go. Episode 109 in the books. Man, the summer flying by. Fall season here. We got the CBS pairings for you last week, the Fox pairings for you this week. And as Phil said, we should start to hear the college football stuff. So make sure you like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast at Last Word on Sports. And make sure you pay attention to see what is happening with all the NFL and college football stuff. Because as we said, the Fox side changed a bit. The CBS side stayed the same. We'll see what that means for college football. And then the baseball, dog days of summer, it's going to be turning into playoff season very quickly. And then the NBA and the NHL will all be back. So we're sure to hear. We want to hear what happens. I did see John Tesh today said he's got a little quirk to the new round ball rock he's going to be putting out for NBC. I'm sure TJ discussed more. I'm pretty sure he did about the Warner Brothers Discovery and where that all sits. If you want to get more into the weeds on the NBA situation and where TNT kind of sits. Charles Barkley, by the way, reversing course. He's not going to retire, and he's not going anywhere. He says he's staying at TNT. So, Sir Charles, we didn't take yet your word anyway, and you proved to us why we shouldn't have. So there you go. Episode 109 in the books for the Announcer Schedules podcast, and we appreciate everybody's support out there. All right, for Phil, I'm Mike. This has been episode 109 of the Announcer Schedules podcast. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.